you. Can you hear me okay? Okay, it's great. I have a cold, so my voice is deeper than usual, but maybe that's okay. Thanks for that introduction, Bob. I'm just going to talk about a couple of things that a large group of us have been working on. It's not just my work, but I've been writing the reports that you may have read during the season, and we've updated this management guide that I hope you all picked up when you came in. If you didn't, I have copies. There are more copies. Please take them with you. There are a few key things, changes that we've made to it this season, and I'll talk about those. I'm going to just briefly talk about SWD biology because it relates to our statewide monitoring network, and talk about the report, give the report summary basically, and then talk about the management guide and the key updates in that, and then a couple of other resources that are important for SWD management. So we've seen this diagram before if you've been here, and it's also in this on page, on page 2, there's the life cycle of the SWD. And what's important about how it behaves in cherry is that for the most part, it's inside the fruit until it's an adult. So the eggs, the larvae, and the pupae are all inside that cherry until it emerges as an adult. And the generation time is really rapid, as we all may already have experienced and are very familiar with. But the optimum temperatures for egg laying and rapid development are between 68 and 77 degrees Fahrenheit. But the activity of the SWD actually slows when it gets too hot or it gets too cold. And so the cold part of it is good to know about when we're trying to manage larvae, infested fruit that might have very, first instar larvae in it. So freezing the fruit will halt development. It'll kill it, basically. Juicing them, obviously, will also kill. But as far as what the biology of the pest and how it relates to infestation in the field, there's evidence that wooded edges are providing shelter for winter diapause. So they're going into the woods and overwintering there. There are wild hosts in there that that provide a source for them to lay eggs in early in the season before cherries are ready for them to infest. And then it's also providing shelter from summer heat. We had some traps that were in the woods this season after the crop was already done. This was actually near a strawberry field in this case, but the trap was moved to the woods and it just got about 1,000 SWD in it in 1 week. And so we know they're just sort of holding it, they're just in there, hunkering down when it's really hot. So for monitoring purposes, we're placing these traps in a way that would maximize capture of SWD when they're moving from the woods into the crop. So the monitoring network, this is the 3rd, 4th, 5th, I don't know how many years we've been doing this now, but we've had 16 trap checkers working on this throughout the state. 180 sites were monitored, in 22 counties. Over 27,000 SWD flies were sorted, counted, and there were 11 reports. And I divided the, let's see, it's not working. Okay, good. So because of the phenology of the fly, so when it's first, when it's rapidly developing, it's very similar. I mean, I was going to separate these out by regional graphs and have, southeast, one for the southeast, one for the southwest, one for the ridge, west central, and then one for the northwest. But these 3 areas are very, very similar in terms of when the flies are first appearing. So I combined them into 2 graphs. And so the weekly reports contain something like this, if I push the right button. Northern Lower Peninsula, this is everyone up here, Southern Lower Peninsula. And this red bar that we added this year was to try to indicate when that 5 to 10% trap catch was being met. And so you'll see that we actually were a little late in getting our traps out in the Southwest. June 7th is this date right here. And we're already at that 5 to 10% catch. And why that's important is because one of the management guidelines that we've been talking about is initiating management. If your crop is at the susceptible stage and 5 to 10% of the traps in your region are catching SWD adults. This is the combined data. And you'll see also, let's see, the pattern is very similar. The blue bars are the number of traps capturing SWD. The average SWD per trap. The red dots are the percent traps capturing SWD. And so July 14th, this is July 14th, is when we're starting to see the surge. When were you at your peak harvest? When were you ripening, your fruit ripening? Around what date? Up here. Does anybody know? About then. Well, down in the south, they were pretty much done harvesting. Am I right, Larry? Is that right? Yeah. So the fly is actually appearing at the same time in south and the north, but just because of the delay of when harvest happens up here, you're getting hit with the flies, as you all know. So what have we got for you? We have, in addition to those reports that are coming out, that will continue to come out next year, commercial lures so this is the updated management guide that you have in your hands. And on page 3, we're making a statement now that all the commercial lures are about equivalent to the yeast sugar bait. So if you want to use a commercial lure, we're not recommending any one in particular. They all worked about as well as the yeast sugar bait this season when they were tested. If you're going to look for larvae infestation, if you want to check if your management program is working, use the sugar method, not the salt method. Those instructions are in that section on page 4. So that's a totally new revised section. There are updated ratings for a number of different insecticides, and those are all in the table on page 6. These ratings are also updated in the fruit management guide, the E154, but they're provided here for you. So a couple of these materials have an S next to them. And those are Movento and Apta, and S just means suppression. So it's providing suppression, but we also consider it to be, in the case of Movento, a good product, and in the case of Apta, an excellent product. So these are all the ratings, and about half a dozen of them have changed from last season. We also simplified this table, so it just contains the rate, the application rate. You're going to have to refer to the label for all the other details. So we also have all our resources are pooled together in this SWD IPM resource page online. The reports are going to continue next season, and they're also archived on this IPM page. And then, of course, there will be a 2017 guide that you should all pick up when you're at Expo, and that's been updated this year as well, and that will have a lot of important information in it. Okay. So like I said, we're going to continue this monitoring network. We think it's really important to continue to watch this pattern over the years and to provide that 5 to 10% regional number for people to possibly use, in addition to traps you might have on your farm. And I just wanted to note that Larry Goot spent a lot of time looking at all of the data that was collected from the Northwest Station and didn't find any difference because what we used were a subset of traps for this step monitoring network, and the pattern is identical to, so whether we added more traps or not, the pattern is identical to in that Northwest slide graph. And then we have that updated, we're going to be continuing to update the SWD management guide as we learn more about this pest. And then, of course, we'll be doing more coordination of research within MSU and across the U.S. and the world in the formation of this new task force. So this project, the monitoring network, is funded by Project Green, by Michigan Cherry Committee, in part by Michigan Horticultural Society, and then these were all of the 16 different people who were helping to gather this data this season. So that is my last slide, if there are any questions.
Questions? Way back, go for it.
Yeah, maybe more of a discussion. Could you go back to the chemical listing, Juliana?
Yeah.
And my question is really about PHIs. Are those PHIs working? Is there a way we can address some of those and shorten them up? Are there compounds that maybe the blueberry industry has with a shorter PHI that would help us?
Yeah.
So what might they be?
Well, one obvious one would be Mustang Max. Blueberry PHI is it 3 or 1? What is it? 1. It's 1 PHI for blueberry. And that is because of Japanese beetle, actually, not because of SWD. They had that issue with Japanese beetle close to harvest. A lot of their PHIs got changed at that time. So yeah, that would be one to definitely focus on with the Mustang Max, because we know it's excellent, and we already know that they've been able to shorten the PHI in blueberry.
Don't you guys, in blueberries, don't they use Lanate with 3-day PHI, and we don't even have it in cherries?
Yeah, that's another one. Lanate has a 3-day PHI. I'm getting nods of the head from blueberry growers. Mm-hmm. Any other comments about this table or other materials that you would like? Oh, Larry.
I just want to respond to that, so I don't know if you know, so John and I, we've met to talk about that, obviously, and started the process. We picked 2 materials, I think, Hemadan and Mustang Max at this time. It's about a 3 or 4 year process to get that done. So the process has started. You have to go through all the testing, you have to work with the company. You can't get it next year, it's absolutely impossible. But the process has started, and those are the ones that we picked.
And Larry, can you tell us why you picked those 2?
Well, we picked them because of their high efficacy. We picked them because they have the highest efficacy, and they have PHIs that we would like to change. And we're open to suggestions. Those are just our thinking. Excuse me.
Yeah, in the case of Imidan, we have a 3-day without residual in blueberries. I don't know why we not adjust it for also.
We can't. So you have, I mean, we can,
Okay.
but you can't just adjust it. You have to go through the whole process.
No, we went through that process.
You went through that process
Yeah.
a long time ago when it first started.
Right. Yeah, it was, all of those PHIs in blueberry were changed because of a different pest. It was because of Japanese beetle, so which helped them be ready. I mean, in fact, for this pest, unknowingly, they didn't know this was coming, but yeah. Go ahead, Ken.
I think one of the other questions though is, I know we're spraying more, so there's got to be other implications here for maximum labeled rates and other pests that are going to be in the orchard because we're using these chemicals. And so I'm sure that's one of the things that you're considering, right?
Yes.
And Juliana, for the benefit of our Zoom guests and others in the room, you want to repeat that question?
Okay, so Ken's comment, basically, or question was just that there are also other considerations. We're spraying more, so we have to be careful about maximum rate usage in the field and other pests that are in the orchard at different times. It's true, yes. Yeah, the interval between sprays is also important. So I didn't put that, I removed that column because it's something that you can get off of the label, for one thing. And the other thing is that with this pest, because it's such a rapidly reproducing pest, you really need to alternate different modes of action. It's so, so important to do that, so you're not building up resistant populations. And so I think because you're going to be rotating with different modes of action, usually you're not going to come up against that interval problem. Because you're not going to be spraying, you should not be spraying Imidan back to back, for instance, or any other product that has the same mode of action. Yeah,
As far as Imidan, it is extremely effective. Other crops have a use rate of, I think, up to 4 pounds in application. I think plums do, peaches. I'm not sure about blueberries, but I know other four-spotted wing Drosophila, we used to be able to use more than this. Going the other way, we should be going up.
okay, so the comment was about Imidan. In other crops, there's a higher maximum rate per season and not in cherry. And okay, so that's very much related to all of the products that you've had labeled for you and available and something called the risk cup. So if the label, if the registrant didn't, thought there were too many things already available, then they just wouldn't have increased that max rate. So if there's something else so it's all a balancing act, for sure.
When the blueberry people had the issue with the Japanese beetle, did it take them 4 years to get the PHI to change?
That's a good question. Does anybody know? Carlos?
Yeah, I work on the,
Sorry, didn't.
I'm sorry, I'm
Yeah.
Carlos Garcia from West Central Michigan. Yeah, I work with Larry Olson and establishing the requirement for EPA to lower the pre-harvest interval to 3 days. It took us like 1 year. We did a residue analysis with workers running through the fields. We collected samples from babies, hens, goats, everything. It took us like one complete year of study and another year to submit all the results. What happened is that we had, Imidan was based on California study. In California, there is no rain, so basically the insecticide remains longer on the fruit than in Michigan when we have a continuous rain. So we end up with very low limits of residues in comparison to what we have in California. So, but it takes some effort to do it, but we know how to do it.
So the question, let me repeat, sorry for the Adobe connector, the Zoom, is that how long did it take blueberry growers to get those reduced PHIs? And in the case of Imidan, it took at least 2 years. And they had to do those residue tests because in California, the residue tests had been based mainly on California results where they don't have a lot of rainfall. And in Michigan, we would expect there to be a lot more wash off and less residues left behind. So the whole year had to be devoted to just testing your residue aspect of it, and then the paperwork submitted over here. Yes.
Is there anything in process to do that?
So,
Question.
yeah, the question is there a process right now for looking at Imidan or for any of these?
For addressing the PHIs, SWD.
Yeah, so Larry Good brought up that we have targeted 2 products, Imidan and Mustang Max, to try to reduce those PHIs. So that process has begun with those 2 products. If they're
IR4 to start getting the residue
Yeah.
data. And,
So IR4 is where you have to start to get the residue data, and those are the 2 products that John Wise and Larry Good thought would be the best to start with because of their efficacy and because we know they have lower PHIs in blueberry. If there are other suggestions for products that you would like to see, then I would.
What about like Malafine and 7? Are you going to add those to the list? Malafine is 3 days to harvest, 3 days.
Yeah, so Larry, do you want to comment about Malafine and 7? Why they're not on the list, I guess?
you only can get so many priorities in IR4. You can only do so much. So, and we also have MRL issues here, so we're trying to balance the MRL issues. Imidan's a really tough one. I don't know if Mark wants to say anything, but we have data for residues. So we're trying to balance those. I mean, you can pick as many as you want, but there's only so many priorities. There's only so much that's going to get done.
Yeah, I know Malafine is a product they're using in blueberry, for sure. Yes.
Malafine is not very long lasting.
Yeah.
I'm saying 2 days. We just use it in a pinch when we need a 1-day spray.
Okay.
And If you use malathion, it's a disaster.
Okay, so we have a blueberry grower saying that they only use malathion in a pinch when they really need something right before they're gonna harvest essentially, or one day. Because it has a very, it doesn't last very long, the rest, yeah. Mhm.
Plus we got we can use the 2.5 pint versus the 2 pint that sort of snuck up on us 2 years ago.
Okay, so they have a different rate, a higher rate that you can use?
Yes.
Yeah. A lot of questions about products.
My question was on intervals.
Okay.
I know that full covers are also the best, but there's growers that are still doing half covers. Or maybe they're doing spraying aside at 3 days and then having like with Imidan, and because it's taking them that long to cover. And some will write that down as a full cover, but some don't want to do that. So what is, getting to be able to go in sooner to get your other side?
Yeah, so that is a good question. Bob, do you wanna talk
Repeat the
about
question
that?
first of all.
Okay, so the question was about full covers versus every other row, alternate rows, and whether and what impact that has on intervals, or what does it mean in terms of returning with the same product within a certain interval. And I wanted to, maybe Bob or Larry or somebody to,
Getting the language changed.
Yeah.
Label.
well,
Or
so first of all, I think I can say that we have to think about SWD more like a fungal disease because of how rapidly it reproduces. And if you're not hitting all of those insects, they move really easily, they fly really well. So if you're just hitting half the row, they can come right back in and go to the untreated side of that tree. So it's if at all possible, we're really strongly recommending full covers. I know practically speaking, it's hard to do that in some cases, but that's really what this is about. This is how we have to manage this pest. Is there anyone else?
Yeah, so I'll show some data. We tried to do a little bit of that, looking at every row, alternate rows for 7 and 10 days. So I'll show you some of that. But then, Brian, I don't know if you might want to comment. We ran into trouble with this with chlorothalonil, and that's where all of a sudden this retreatment interval became so important, because the interpretation of what is a half cover, and you come back in, then you're coming in again and potentially breaking the regulation of a retreatment interval. So we've not really asked any more questions beyond. So I don't know, Brian, if you want to say something.
Yeah, if the label says, do not reapply within 3 days or something like that. If you did alternate row middle spring, that is a treatment. I don't care what rate you put on, if it's a half rate or not, you treated that block. And it would be against the labels to go back into that block and treat the other rows within that time period. Now, not all labels state it the way that chlorothalonil is, but the way chlorothalonil or bravo has gotten a label, it's not out to be violated.
Okay, so we got into the alternate row. So Nikki Rockwell is going to show some data that they did on alternate row versus full covers. And then there was this issue of chlorothalonil specifically, which is fungicide, also known as Bravo, that the label specifically says that you cannot reapply. If you've applied it at any rate on a particular day, half cover, full cover, it's an application and you have to wait that interval before you can come back in. That's the way that particular label reads, and that's from Brian Verhoekstra from MDART. Go ahead.
I guess my comment on the whole thing would be, for the size of some of the acreage, especially in Oceana County that some of these farms are, they cannot physically cover their acres. We all know that a full cover is best. No one's arguing that. But if it takes the guy 3 days to put every other row on his farm, and then he wants to come back in and start the other row on the 4th day, do we need to look at getting some of that retreatment language on the labeling changed or adapted to what the reality of what the growers are facing?
Well, okay, so my question would be, what, do we know enough about the biology? If you're just treating half of your orchard, half of it's untreated, and you've got this pest still reproducing on that half that's not treated,
Right, I understand
Yeah,
that.
but-
So you have a choice.
right?
It takes you 6 days to spray your farm.
Uh-huh,
You can start out on the first orchard and spray a full cover and leave nothing, leave the second half of your farm completely untreated
right?
until day 6, until you can get over the acreage.
Okay, so what about, so you wouldn't have to worry about interval if you're alternating with a different mode of action. Am I right? A
So
different
you're gonna
product?
go every other row with one chemistry and every other row with another chemistry.
What do you think of that? I mean, does that seem bizarre? You've never done it before. Is that what, you just haven't gone in with an alternate row of different products?
I think it's.
I mean, because then you wouldn't be, am I right, Brian? It wouldn't be impacting, you wouldn't be infringing on whatever the label said about intervals, because you'd be coming in with something else.
Right, but we're talking about, what are suggestions from the industry for how we can,
Right,
what we want to address as far as label change.
sure.
So do we want to try to address as an industry some of these retreatment intervals on some of the labeling?
Yeah, well, okay, so my only concern about going in rapid, basically, if you're treating on one day with this material and you come in 4 days later, is that going to help with, is that going to produce a resistant population?
Right.
So wouldn't it be, it seems like if you can only do alternate row, you would want to come in with some other mode of action anyway, just because you're trying to keep knocking at that population from all angles. That's what it seems, with these different modes of action. That seems like it would be the good strategy. I think we might be,
I don't know.
I don't know the answer either, but that's just
You have to, so
thinking
you
it
have
through.
to double the number of sprayers and applicators on your farm then to cover your acreage quicker,
Yeah,
which that's not very
it's very,
feasible.
yeah, it's very, okay, so,
One
more question?
One more question.
Following up on that, there's not a lot of choice for other things. You're down to the key day. You've got the antibiotics, which are always immensely expensive. That interval gets pretty important at that point.
Yeah, so the comment was that there aren't a lot of options at the 3-day PHI. You can see that from this list, and one of the options is only fair pounds. Don't even know that anyone is using that, but that is why we need to work on reducing the PHIs, obviously, for some of these other materials that we know are effective, that we know are being used in other systems. But at any rate, I appreciate all these comments. We appreciate them, I should say. Thank you.
How about a nice round of applause?